Okay, let's get started. I'm Francis Parker from the Urban Planning Department. My pleasure is to introduce Rollin Stanley this afternoon in our guest lecture series. We got to know Rollin. We used to do field trips for the planning department in the fall field trip week. We'd go up to Toronto, and on one of those trips we made contact with Rollin, who at that time was working for the Toronto Planning Commission, and he would give us a walking tour of downtown Toronto, and it would be the fastest paced, fastest talked field trip that we'd have. We'd go from building to building, and he'd say, okay, now look at this building, now here's what you need to know about this building, this is how this project happened, this is what the developer did, this is what the city did, this is how it all came together. Next building, question, move on to the next one. Phenomenal. And so we've kept up since then. He worked 21 years in Toronto, and then was lured away to be director of planning and urban design for St. Louis. Very different kind of city, from a exploding dynamic city to an imploding city. Fascinating contrast. And then between the time that we asked him to come for this talk and now, he's moved on yet again to Montgomery County, Maryland, where he heads a staff of 170 people, probably one of the largest planning operations in the U.S., suburban this time. So Rollin started out in a small town in northern Ontario, moved to the big city, came across the border and is now making the rounds. And along the way, he picked up a wife who was an alum of ours, as it turns out. So he has a lot of connections. This is the second time he's been here. And without further ado, I'll just turn it over to Rollin.
Thank you, Francis. I don't need that. Can you hear me up there? It's been 17 years since I was invited back. You can come up later and I'll tell you why. That was the first slide I showed at the last presentation, which I will not show this evening. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a lot tonight. I'm going to move real quick. I may ask some questions. I like to walk around. So, I'm going to talk about strategies for rebuilding urban environments. I worked in the city that had the largest percentage decrease of population in any American city in this country. St. Louis lost 62% of its population. Okay? 508,000 people left in 45 years. Not as many people as Detroit, but more as a percentage. So, we're going to focus a bit on that first, and then we're going to move to Youngstown, Ohio, which may have some more relevant things to the city in which you live of Muncie. And I have a theory. The theory is behind you. E equals MC squared, what I call the Einsteinian city. Now, I actually spoke at a conference on declining cities at the University of California, Berkeley, with professors from around the world, and I actually called it the Newtonian city, and none of them got it, which kind of surprised me. So I think there's a whole bunch of guys in Germany espousing the Newtonian city theory as we speak today. So, what do I mean by that? E is energy. And energy is defined by mass, mass being the mass of services, like rec centers, shopping facilities, that sort of stuff. C is the concentration of people. And the energy level is more influenced by the concentration of people than it is by the concentration of mass. And the case in point being a city versus a suburb. And suburbs are the legend of Sleepy Hollow, because they have a low concentration of people. And when gas hits $6 a gallon, we'll just find out how bad that really is. And actually, you're very fortunate here, because when I left yesterday, a price of a regular gallon of gas in Maryland was $3.29. So it's getting there. So I have this theory that as we rebuild our cities, if we want a higher energy level, we've got to increase the concentration of people. So what I'll talk about is how that happens. So higher C value has a multiplier effect. So there's St. Louis, lovely city. At one time, the fourth largest city in America. That time happened to be 1904 during the World's Fair and the Olympic Games. St. Louis unionized boat tow companies wouldn't allow a railway bridge to be built, so they built it 120 miles north, and Chicago became Chicago, and St. Louis became St. Louis. So, but more has happened in St. Louis in the last 6 years than happened in the previous 45. In fact, downtown St. Louis built more housing in the immediate downtown within the first 4 years of this millennium than the city of Los Angeles. And it was all done through historic preservation. We have a light rail system that gets to the airport. All those things that we can build on. Well, for those of you who don't know where St. Louis is, here's where it is. So what I want to cover briefly is where we were, where we are, where we were headed in St. Louis, and then I'll talk about Youngstown and how it was a slightly different approach. So, by the way, that bottom picture, that building was revitalized. It's now affordable housing. The top one was not. Have you ever heard of building rustling? You heard of cattle rustling? It's the same thing, but for buildings. That's what happens in places like St. Louis and Cleveland. You drive by a place in the afternoon, Friday, you come back on Monday, it's gone. All that's left is the wood. The bricks are on their way to New Orleans or California. All the plumbing is gone. Well, in fact, the copper gutting will disappear on your house while you're in it. Metal recycling factories stay open until 2 o'clock in the morning. We spent $17 million of federal government rehabbing the main street, which I'll show in a minute. The $1,000 a pop garbage cans, 10 were gone the first day. All recycled for metal. So there are challenges. Fourth largest city, as I said, you can see what the population is now. We lost 508,000 people. That averages 10,200 a year. Units lost, that's a lot of units. 86,000. And I like to compare this to Katrina because I gave the same presentation to the APA conference in New Orleans, but 45 to 50% of the population left in New Orleans. We lost 62%. 50% of their units were damaged or lost. We lost 33%, and that doesn't include the 18% of the units today that are vacant. So the impacts in St. Louis, the impacts in Cleveland, the impacts in Detroit are actually worse than what's happened in Katrina. Why? Because it's systemic. It happened over a period of time. There's no cataclysmic event in which to draw the resources of the federal government to rush in and make things better. So what happens is it becomes ingrained in your health and everything that happens. And I'm going to talk about that. Because as architects or planners, these are important things that you need to know about. By the way, that little drive we just took, I'll get back to that area in a minute. You all know about Pruitt-Igoe? No. Okay. That's Pruitt-Igoe. Built in the 1950s, blown up 17 years later. And it wasn't just low-income African-American people. Pruitt was the African-American portion, Igoe was the white portion. And it failed for numerous reasons, but it's the poster child for the failures of public housing in this country, which is really quite a business. And you see it there, 33 11-story buildings, 1.5 million square feet. I love this slide because I was doing this presentation in London with the mayor competing for an award against Manchester, England, and I knew they were going to put the heartstrings when the IRA blew up 1.5 million square feet of downtown Manchester. Well, watch this. This is an experiment, by the way.
Door wrecking company will explode the supporting columns from an 11-story vacant high-rise. Part one of a study to determine if these buildings can be reshaped into a better environment for our people. Not only St. Louis, but the rest of the nation is viewing with great interest the results of this experiment.
They sure were thinking, how stupid can you be? Look at this. So the theory here was to blow up half the building, then renovate it and put the people back in. And that would make it better. And they actually did this. You've seen the video. That's how stupid it was. One of the things you have to know about Pruitt-Igoe is the elevators only stopped on every second floor. So nobody felt safe in the stairways. They didn't maintain. There's a whole multitude of reasons. Public schools. We went from 106,000 to 32,000 students, a 70% decline, 30 million deficit. As I showed earlier today, we sold that school to a doctor for $25,000. We're about to eminent domain it back. I'll come back to it. But there were dozens of schools that were made available. Here's a good one. The Economic Development Department, when he made the list of schools available, came down to see me, and there was a school just like this, a little better. And they came down to see me the next day. He said, well, you know that school, Grazio School? I said, yeah. He said, well, Rollin, you know, it's next to a door to a Denny's restaurant. I said, yeah, I know that. Well, the Denny's is 24 hours, and they need more parking. How would you feel if we blew up the school for a surface parking lot for the Denny's restaurant? So that pretty much gives you the economic viewpoint of the world and what great visionaries there usually are in the economic development departments around the country. So, oops, sorry, I went backwards. So, what happened in St. Louis happened in many places. 5 interstate highways cross 62 square miles. Interstate highways were never supposed to go into inner city America. And as I just said in the last class, we have interstate highways because, anybody from the last class? Because Eisenhower marveled at how well the Nazis moved the troops around in Germany during the Second World War. The height of a bridge is determined by the height of an M1 truck on M1 tank on a truck. So we had 5 interstate highways on 62 square miles. The people just fled. Car ownership, interstate highways, prosperity, cheap suburban land, and most importantly, race. Because when they blew up Pruitt-Igoe, they bought houses in the surrounding neighborhoods and they put low-income residents into those houses who didn't know how to maintain them. One crime occurred. I have people who worked for me in St. Louis whose parents literally walked away from their houses. Just walked away. Still happens today, actually, in places like that. Density. We went from 14,000 people per acre to under 6,000. 16% of the land was vacant. Businesses, we lost 65% of the businesses, and the household income took a tank. It's 27,000 per household in the city. It's 47,000 out in the suburbs. So, what have we been trying to do? Make things better for the youth, rebuild the opportunities in the city, and rebuild the marketplace. And we've been very, very successful. I keep saying we like I'm still there, but it's only been a month.
Actually, I love living downtown. It's a vibrant community. It's really it's a neighborhood, actually. People really look at it as a business district, but with all the lofts and other apartments and alternative housing available, it's really become a community. You walk down the street and you say hello to your neighbors. I grew up in the Clinton Peabody projects, just south of downtown. Watching the development happen here has been unbelievable. I mean, more and more, almost every day, the streetscape seems to change. From a small business perspective, I mean, they make it so easy. You walk into one office, and it's literally one-stop shopping, which helped me actually find a location and helped me find funding through the city in the form of a forgivable loan. Now, with the availability of funding for developers, we're beginning to see buildings that were not in use for many years come to life as new residential and or business and or mixed-use properties, which I think really drives the community down here.
Now, Chuck said a lot of important things. He's since moved to California. That's true. Most people laugh when I say that. But Chuck ran a small business. We gave him $50,000 to open up his business, do a loan, and we're going to talk about all these things that you can do to help him revitalize places. So we have several goals. One is, in St. Louis, in which 52% of the population is African American, there are stereotypes. It's very, very important to overcome those stereotypes through a myriad of ways. One is immigration, which is extremely important. 2 is to create opportunities like public transit, where people must interact daily. So if you go to where I live right now, and I'm 5 minutes from the Red Line in Washington, everybody rides it. Where I'm from in Toronto, everybody rides the streetcars, the subways, or whatever. You'll find that your populations tend to be more harmonious. And that's critical to try and overcome decline. Retail priorities. You've got to look at the opportunities strategically, like this closed grocery store, and how you can do things to make them better. And how you can make everybody shop at these places and not just make them streamlined so they meet one segment of the population. Secondly, we've been trying to build the diversity. We became a resettlement area for Bosnian refugees. That was really critical because immigrants tend to take over the areas that have declined where nobody else wants to be. And if you have a constant flow of immigration, you don't get decline. Now, having said that, the Bosnians still want the American dream. When they get money, they still tend to move to the suburbs because they want that house with the fence. But they maintain the businesses and anchor the communities. They also like to buy 2-family buildings and rent the units out, stabilize them. 37% of those loft units downtown, and we've now hit 5,000, are actually owned by the age of people over 50. So they've sold the suburban home, had the big garage sale, which actually I just did when I moved from 3,500 square feet to 1,200 square feet from St. Louis. And it's a huge market because they want to be close to everything. The good thing about this is it's just not young people. Because you don't want just young people like yourselves, you want older people too so that you get diversity. And the one thing any good person who controls a retail district will tell you is you don't want restaurant, 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 restaurant. You want restaurant, restaurant, clothing store, restaurant, gift shop, restaurant, da, 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 da. You want it altered. So during the day, different things are interacting. It's just not a peak time in the evening. So all those things you have to keep in mind as we try to rebuild these urban places. And this is true also for small centers. Goal 3, education. Is there an inner city school system in America that is not troubled? I'm not aware of one. Philadelphia's is in the tank. St. Louis's is in the tank. They've both been taken over by the state. And we've been trying different and creative ways to try and rebuild them, but this is not an easy problem. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any easier. But if you want, and I said this earlier today, if you want a fascinating career, go work for a school board, because you will not believe the experiences you will have. I must have spent 30% of my time over 2 years with both the public school system and the Catholic school system in St. Louis, and it is a fascinating exercise. And it's a true one, because people won't move into the city because crime, and they're worried about when the kids become a school age, where are they going to go to school? Which is where you come into magnet schools, but we won't get into details. But this is very, very important. So for example, this school, Adams School, was abandoned. We reopened it up with the help of the 10th largest hospital in America, Barnes Jewish in St. Louis. The Cardinals baseball team built a sports facility, and we created partnerships with businesses to attract and pay higher salaries for teachers we wanted to bring into the school after we renovated it to make it work. So any night of the week you go in there, it's now a busy place. I mentioned schools. We had 20 schools that we just sold off. That school sold for $1 million, and it was renovated into 80 apartments, and where the playing field was, they built 27 houses. Now, there was a tremendous backlash to this because the community didn't want to see the school go. The freaking school had been closed for 25 years. They still complained. But now, it's an important part of the community in that it's an anchor and something is happening there. And of course, I'll get into how we made it work, because it wouldn't have worked by the market system alone. Because it cost as much to renovate that building in St. Louis as it does in Chicago or Denver without the return. But I'll get back to that. Regionally, St. Louis is a region of over 201 different cities and towns. It is incredibly fractured, and every one of them has the same powers. It's pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And as a result, they've all tiffed on the edge of the city to create the big boxes. So our retail tax dollars went down in St. Louis. In St. Louis, you can, in the Missouri, the cities can apply a retail sales tax. It was terrible, but we still do some things good. Everybody is welcome to come into the art museum, the zoo, etc. It's all free. And there's a regional tax for things like that. And those things are very, very helpful. And if any of you are interested in park systems, you should Google the Great Rivers Greenway. And we got special legislation in the state over 3 counties to create a tax fund, a sales tax, that generates about $10 to $14 million a year to fund the regional park system. And we've done some real creative things inside the city about we'll have only the 3rd elevated rail corridor turned into a green space. And it's a really good thing to do, and you should research that. Goal 4, still thinking regionally. 49% of the homeless cases in the city of St. Louis don't come from the city of St. Louis. So if you're a single mom out in the county and you domestic violence, no place to go. You come into the city, my tax dollars paid for it, and the county folk never paid for anything. That's your problem. You deal with it. But you live and die as a region. And that's been St. Louis's issue. And it's very, very difficult to overcome that, but we've been successful in doing it with the homeless situation, which is actually getting very, very good. And in fact, when the mayor and I were giving this presentation in London last year, we were actually competing against Kansas City for some godforsaken reason. I couldn't figure it out. So we went first, and I gave this basic presentation. So the judges asked the mayor of Kay Barnes, he's no longer the mayor of Kansas City, well, what about your homeless? And she says, oh, well, we have a bus that goes around and picks them up in the morning and takes them outside the city. And I'm sitting at the back of the room. I looked at the mayor, they looked at me, and he wrote on the paper, I am no longer worried about Kansas City. I mean, I couldn't believe she said this. I mean, I was just like astounding. Plus, the first question they got asked, it was an urban renewal category. The first judge said, you've shown us some very pretty pictures of Kansas City. We'd all love to live here. But what have you had to overcome? And her answer was surface parking lots. Go figure. So homelessness is a big issue you should all be involved with and dealing with. Goal 5, providing a healthy environment. And how many of you in this class, in this room, are learning about these things as planners? And if you're not, you should be. Because the federal government, the state government are downloading services to municipalities, and you have to take care of them. So, when people don't have access to good food and they all get fat because they're all shopping at 7-Eleven and KFC, you have these problems, and you have to pay for them. St. Louis shuttered 2 hospitals in the 1980s because we didn't have the money to pay for them. And the health problems became tremendous. We can't deal with them. But we've been trying. 31% fewer teen births, That's a huge issue for inner city America, folks. Teen birth. Single moms age 17 with 3 kids. It's a big problem. It's a huge problem. And if you looked at the crime stats in the paper last week, you'll realize one of the factors why it's a big problem. And you need to deal with it. 4% low-weight birth drop. 10% drop in infant mortality. Heart disease drop. Respiratory disease drops. These are all positive factors that you need to track to find out how your city, your town is doing to do what? Quality of life. That's old style. Quality of place. You know, everybody talks about live, work, play. What a load of crap. Where's the health component in that? It's quality of life, quality of place, health. Child and senior care. Who's working on that? Who's working on what the new trends are to accommodate the baby boomers? You've got to accommodate these things because you're going to be dealing with it, not me. I'll be retired by that time. It'll be your problem. And you're going to have to be figuring out where to put me when I'm senile, which should be in about 15 minutes. Because I scraped a lot of lead paint in my day with a heat gun. I never worried about lead paint in Canada. In St. Louis, $16 million is going into lead paint remediation on houses. Why? Because we have tested 90% of the children under the age of 9. We have done blood level testing to find out what the lead paint is in those kids' freaking blood. They're all contaminated. We've got to deal with the housing stock to make life better for those kids who have the single mom as a parent, to help them get a leg up so they don't end up in freaking jail. And it's all systemic. It's all connected. Now, do you know anything about the lead grants issued by the federal government? You should. Very, very important. And they're anxious to give the money away.
I could not keep up my house, and I was looking for a place to live that was convenient and safe. Living in here, we have a dining room upstairs. We have a store. It's convenient for everywhere I have to go. There's plenty of transportation close to shows and different activities we have here. I love it. They're building all over St. Louis. They're making it so beautiful. They're building up areas where I thought was just lost. Places that you thought that they were just going to tear down or just leave the building standing. The building has been standing for I don't know how long. And now they are tearing them down and rebuilding because there's so many people are moving back down here.
She lives in one of those abandoned hospitals. It was abandoned for 20 years. We used about 5 different tax credit programs to put that deal together in the heart of a very distressed neighborhood. And when you walk down the corridors of that home, I'd love to live there. There's white people, African American people, Vietnamese people, all enjoying themselves in a good quality environment. And we're working on the neighborhood around it. But those are the kinds of assets I'm going to talk about in a minute to try and turn inner cities around. That's where Tina Turner got her start, on the left. Gaslight Square, one of the Frank Sinatra, they all played there. One of the busiest destinations for live entertainment in America in the early 1960s. There was a very bad shooting in 1964. It looked like that about 2 years later for the next 40 years. Today it looks like that. It's about rethinking what you're doing with your land. And the Youngstown example I'm going to give you in a bit, we'll talk a bit about that. It's about assessing yourself and saying, there's the city of St. Louis. We had almost 900,000 people. They ain't coming back. All the main streets had streetcars on them. They don't now. So we can't get back that much commercial activity, so you have to rethink how you do it. Now, how many of you worked with master plans in your school days here? You know, some of them are like about this thick, some are about this thick. That's the master plan I did for the city of St. Louis. That's it. It's a poster. Folds up this big, folds out. It's a poster. Everything you need to know about building in the city of St. Louis is on those 2 pages. If you want us to give you tax abatement or tax increment financing, that tells you where it's going to go. And that's the hardest thing I ever had to do. You see those orange areas? Those are the residential areas we're going to bulldoze. Remember Dick Gephardt? When he was an alderman in St. Louis, he did that exercise and he showed the entire north side getting bulldozed, and my house even, right down in here being bulldozed. They haven't forgotten us, the people that live there. So when we drew this map, it was very, very, well, it had the potential to become very contentious. Because we're saying that's what we're going to bulldoze. That school building I showed you is right in there. We're going to bulldoze it. We're going to try and bring the resources to bear to rebuild those communities. And that's what that map tells us. That's our land use plan. It also talks about where we're going to do very creative development. This is 3D Automax, by the way. City-owned parcel of land, the alderman came in, wanted to build 8 houses there. I said, Quincy, nobody's going to buy a freaking house here. Even though there's a big grocery store up the street, nobody's going to do that. What can we do in this distressed community, neighborhood, to change the vernacular of it so that it becomes something on somebody's radar screen that they'll want to live there? So there I was in a church, actually in a church on a Saturday afternoon showing this. All the people living there, this lady lifts up her hand. The first question to me was, it's not brick. Second question, in the back of the room, it's not brick. They were fixated on brick. And they were fixated on brick showing the signs of stability for their neighborhood, when really what I was trying to show them is, you got to do something different. Because if you don't, nobody's going to come here. Because the city is full of historic buildings. So I urge you to try and create modern design in your communities when you go to work and get people to think differently or nobody's going to move there. It's a very hard, difficult challenge. And that, my friends, is everything you need to know about new urbanism. Okay? That is that. About 1 million years later. That is on a hilltop in Tunisia. That is transit-oriented development. That is new urbanism. There is nothing new in the word urban. It's very, very old. So if you design everything like that, that's all you need to know about it. Goal 7, economic development. First rule, and I didn't put it here, don't let the economic development guys drive the agenda. I already gave you that example. They just want to bulldoze everything. Okay? Everything they want to bulldoze it because they think it's going to make it better. It's not true. Figure out what your strengths were. We were just in that class. What would you call that class again? Economic development, and they've been given sites around Muncie. Well, if it had been me, I would have been running away as fast as I could. I mean, what are you going to do with these places? But we came up with some creative ideas. Don't you think everybody who's in the room who was in that class? Everybody say yes? See? We came up with some creative ideas. But it's about focusing on what you do and what you can do it well. The NAFTA corridor is basically Kansas City. It's also somewhat St. Louis and somewhat here. These are strengths of which we can build on to make those things work. We're actually doing well biotech there because we got the Danforth Foundation to give us $100 million. Find a foundation. Always good. Suck up to the foundations, people, as much as you can. Transportation, the 8th goal. We're building lots of bike lanes in the city. We're trying to become bike friendly. We're trying to show we're progressive so that the people we try to attract to the biotech industry will want to live there. We're creating great opportunities. We expanded the transit system. All these things you have to do, you already know all that. And we're looking to expand the light rail. This is a main street that used to have streetcars on it going straight down to downtown, very distressed. There's the streetcar system we have now. You'll love this. When we did the transit system, our match was the rail corridors, so we did an elevated platform. And our Metropolitan Transportation Authority has a policy of no on-street running trains. How brain dead is that? You move more people per hour in what? A streetcar? 10 miles of streetcar costs 1 mile of subway. And actually, you should all be doing bus rapid transit. If you want to see a good example, look to Lyon, France. I noticed a lot of people don't travel. Lyon, France has a great bus rapid transit system. But if you do that, and we'd never do the elevated platform, then this happens. Now, some architects do this, which explains there's no street relationship, but that's generally what happens. So we're trying to convey this idea that you have to invest in public infrastructure, which is not easy in a place like St. Louis where everything's so car-oriented. There's no traffic problems in St. Louis. Okay? We actually have just closed one of the only 3 interstate highways across this country. It's going to be closed for 2.5 years. It's closed, folks. Closed. Shut down. Because everybody big boxed out in the community where the 2 interstate highways mixed, and nobody can move there. So we shut it down while we rebuild it. And people are starting to realize, well, maybe we should invest in public transit. But what's the reason we don't invest in public transit? Because all the wealthy people are afraid all the poor inner city residents are going to come out on the subway, steal their big screen TVs, get back on the transit, and ride it back to town. And that's the truth. That subway system just got extended through a residential area that's wealthy. The cost went up $60 million because the wealthy people made them depress it into the ground so that the people in the trains couldn't see into their backyard. $60 million. That's a waste of money. Goal 9, marketing city neighborhoods, and this is just what we talked about in one of the classes I was just in. That's the highest grossing Foot Locker in the state of Missouri. It's in a very low income area. But Foot Locker realized that there was money to be made there. And so they invested in it. And the key is the strength of the inner city markets. And what you'll learn is the suburbs are all about household income. How much does each household make? In the city, it's about density. Give me density or give me death. Because the household incomes are much lower, but because there's so many more households, the aggregate household income is actually substantially greater. So in this case, where I was looking at the potential for grocery stores, and I'm not sure what, yeah, okay. I can actually show that in the inner city, more money will be spent on groceries overall in those areas than will be spent where they're building the grocery stores out in the county, because the population density is higher. And now as you go work in small towns that are distressed and communities that are distressed, now is your time to do that, because the suburban markets are built out. They can't build any more Gap stores. They just can't. They're in financial trouble. So they're looking to go to places where they can make money. So somebody over here was wearing Abercrombie and Fitch. Well, they'll never come into the inner city because of their hiring practices. But if you look at some of these places, they've got to come into the inner cities. Now is the time to attract them and teach them there's a better way to do business. And as I said in the other class, Walmart has 5 models, folks. 2 of them are urban. They just don't tell you about them. And they will green it. Outside in Toronto, they were going to make them green the roof, and they were actually going to do it. So these places can come in. They will come in. Force them to do the right thing and market them now. And take control of the information so you can show them the strength of the market. Trader Joe's, as I said to the class, what is the most important thing that Trader Joe's wants? Education. So you have to show what your education is. And if it's weak, overcome it with other factors. And use demographics now to show you how to do that. And you do the multipliers to show how much money will be spent in those areas. Quality recreation centers. And what's happening, and this is something I'm encountering now in this Montgomery County where I am, is they have this perception of open space as being, fields of grass where bunny rabbits are hopping by and deers are fleeting through, so long as they're not going near rich people's houses where they'll have to be culled. That's not open space. Cities can't afford to provide it anymore. So if you're in an urban area where you're building lots of condos, make the condos provide the rec space for you and make it accessible to the residents in the neighborhood at no cost to the city. The best public open spaces in the world are not public. They're the little squares that get created in between buildings where restaurants and things open up to. So when you design buildings, make sure you have those. Make sure they're basically hard surface so they're not have to be maintained, and make sure they're actively fronted so that's where people will go and enjoy themselves. Because you can't afford to provide those services anymore. So don't think of open space the old way like Project for Public Spaces does. Think about it in a new dimension. Goal 11, leverage your historic resources. See the building on the left? That was that building 2 years ago. I actually have another slide. Oh, here it is. No, it isn't. I had a slide of what it looked like before the eaves troughs fell off. One thing you have to know about vacant buildings, maintain the eaves troughs. Because the day they went to work on it, the whole wall collapsed because the water comes down between the brick courses and it falls. And that's what it looks like today. St. Louis has led the country in the use of federal historic tax credits for 3 years, maybe 4. In Atlanta, they don't use them. And as I said to the mayor of Atlanta, I realized somebody burned the place, but that was 150 years ago. They actually have some historic resources, but they don't take advantage of these. These are a gift horse in the freaking mouth. And if you ain't using them, you're brain dead. And if your state doesn't have a good historic tax credit program, in Missouri, the historic tax program from the state is better than the federal government one because there's no requirement that the building produce income for 5 years. So if you use federal historic tax credits, you got to keep it rental if you're doing apartments. If you're using the state credits, you can make a condo right away. Combined, it's 45% of the cost of the building. So if you're trying to compete with Chicago for builders, and you can offer them a 45% tax credit, that makes your building work. Otherwise, it doesn't. Then you throw in tax abatement and TIFs, which we'll get into in a minute. But historic tax credits are a boom. So this picture right here, every one of those buildings was vacant 6 years ago. Today, every one of them is fully occupied because of historic tax credits. And the units are more creative than what they're building in the new ones in Washington, actually. The building to the top was abandoned for 25 years. It's now apartment buildings. and there'll be condos in 3 years. Think big. Who was it? Something about make no small plans? Who? No, it wasn't. And if you go into the National Building Museum, in where do I live again? Washington. They actually have that quote on the wall, and then they say, generally attributed to Daniel Burden, but really said by, and I can't remember the guy's name, I'm sorry. You're going to have to go there and get it. But it's true. Think big. So here's St. Louis on this mighty riverfront. We're thinking big. We're going to redo it. Well, we can't. It floods. And it floods severely. In fact, it floods real bad. And the Coast Guard won't let us put anything out there unless we protect it. And that's another story. You wouldn't believe. We spent $1 million on modeling. They actually have simulators for barges. We had the computer program. So we're struggling. But you got to think big and think big ideas. There's the view from the arch into the downtown. Somebody said we should deck the highway. It's a good idea. But by God, I hope it never looks like that. Because the last freaking thing we need is more open space in St. Louis. It's got to be something really modern and creative. And plus, we can't make it a tunnel because you have all those fire and safety regs. But think big. One of the ideas is we want to put that lake that's right south of the downtown. That used to be there, but when the malaria hit, they flooded, they buried it. We want to put it back and create wealth around there for people wanting to be adjacent to the water. And we will do that. That will happen. And create a greenway and create a desire to be there. And I'll tell you why. I want to go back to this picture. Right now you're driving down the street to the heart of that area that's red. The red represents every property that's either a vacant building or vacant land, of which the city owns 62%. I was working, before I left, with a church with 5,000 people. There's a congregation with all the incentives I could possibly think of to try and rebuild that neighborhood and get some of that congregation to buy the new homes they're going to build and shop at the services we were going to provide. It's a massive undertaking, folks. And as I said earlier today in the other two classes, if you want to know what life is about, go to the public meeting that I went to and meet the 72-year-old woman who is one of 3 houses left on a block where there used to be 145 houses, who's lived there for 50 years, is 72 years old, and her mother is at the back of the room and she's 97. She's lived there longer. And you ask her what's important, and you will quickly find out what truly counts in life. Versus where I am now, is this being recorded? Where I'm hesitating to think, I haven't found this out yet, where we have the highest level of PhDs of any county in America, where I'm sure their arguments are a little different. But are they more important? I don't think so. And this is where I learned that maybe if the balconies encroach across a sidewalk in Toronto, it's not such a bad freaking thing. There are bigger goals in life, bigger things that we have to do. So that lady who gave the interview in that senior's home, that's why I go to work every day. That's what's important. That's what should be important to you. It's not how pretty the building is, although that helps. Tools, federal grants, home repair loans, buyer assistance, tax abatement, tax credits, facade loans, all important. Every building you see outside that window was vacant 6 years ago. They're all occupied. The building on the top is where they made machine gun bullets in the Second World War and did some nuclear stuff ever since. That's where we're trying to attract that Home Depot I told you. Or did I say this? Maybe I said this in the class. That is a kick-ass regional shopping center site on an interstate highway near the airport. I did the whole computer modeling for it with the demographics. I compared it to almost every Home Depot in America. It beats them all. Will Home Depot go there? No. You know why? Huh? Well, that's not, no, we tore the building down. The building's gone. Why do you think Home Depot doesn't want to go there? Inner city America should be obvious. Race. They won't tell you that. That's why they won't go. They're worried, they're worried about theft levels, all those other things. It's exactly why they won't go there. They will not tell you that. But I can tell you the demographic revenue projections for that site are in the top 10% of any Home Depot in America. And they have no competition. But they will not go. So it doesn't matter what you do sometimes, you can't make it happen, and it's incredibly frustrating. By the way, you should know about every tax credit program I just put up there, and I didn't even list them all. Who in this room knows about new market tax credits except for the people I've spoken to today? I can't believe this. It's the same thing where I'm working now. I'm with the Director of Economic Development. He'd never heard of them. New market tax credits. It can employ over half the people in this room if you know about them when you leave. Guaranteed. Read about them. If you want to ask me about them later, I'll tell you about them. See that building right there? That was, you know the guy who was talking earlier, the shop owner? That's where he grew up, in those projects, right behind that hospital in front. See all those projects behind there? This is right here. That's what it looks like today. They first thought they'd take 2 stories off each building and it would make it better. And they did in fact do that. They physically went in and removed 2 stories off these 12-story buildings. And then 5 years later they blew them all up. And that's what it looks like today. It's the Hope 6 project. And what is the president trying to do in this country? He's trying to act on Hope 6. Hope 6 is the best public housing project. Now, is nobody going to correct me? It's not public housing, folks. It's mixed income housing. And that's what makes it stand apart from affordable housing. And that's why it's the best housing program that ever happened in this country. It's been a boon to cities like St. Louis. You'll have doctors living next door to the single mom who hasn't got a job. And the property's maintained and all these other things. You should learn about these. Remember, Bush has been trying to combine the programs of 8 or 9, I was going to say ministries, that's Canada where I'm from, departments into the Department of Commerce, which includes HUD. And he's trying to reduce the overall budget by something like 40%, from like $8 billion to $5 billion. He's trying to kill funding to cities. HUD is the best thing that ever happened in inner city America. It's just not administered well. Who brought HUD to America? Richard Nixon. Tax incentives. I see Indianapolis is getting a new football stadium. No! Does a football stadium make money? No! How many games a year does it have? 10! Football stadiums are losers, even connected to a convention center. They don't make money. You always lose money on a football stadium. Now baseball stadiums, on the other hand, do a little better. They get 80 games. A little more if you have the World Series. That's the view in the new stadium in St. Louis, which was done 2 years ago when we won the World Series. You build a new stadium, we maxed out on every game we could possibly have. I mean, it was unbelievable. And as a result, it had great benefits for us.
The ballpark was designed with the village in mind, so that what we did is we kept left field wide open. And in doing so, it revealed this 8-acre parcel, 9-acre parcel north of the ballpark where the old ballpark used to be. And what we'll be doing is developing that and taking advantage of that view into the stadium to create a huge mixed-use project with lots of retail and residential and office that we believe will transform downtown St. Louis with a $650 million project of new construction coming online in 2009. The process for coming up with a deal with the city designed mainly with the TIF financing so that incremental tax revenues from this project will help pay for the funding gap and nothing out of general funds from the city. As compared to other ballparks in Major League Baseball, that is the smallest percentage of public sector financing of any ballpark that's been done in the country in the last 15, 20 years.
So we TIF'd it. We're TIFing the development. We're still trying to put the remainder of the finance program together. But the baseball stadium actually is a benefit. Does it still pay for itself? Not necessarily. It will for them in terms of the revenue it's going to generate because they've already sold all the condos looking down into the stadium. But that helps. But of course, hockey arenas are the best. And I'm saying that because I'm Canadian. Hockey arenas are the most multi-purpose facility you can have basketball in. They make money. But the point of this slide was to talk about the financing mechanism of a TIF. And I'm not sure everyone here knows exactly what a TIF is. If you have questions about that, it's about capturing the incremental tax revenues from a base condition to what results as a new development. The problem in Indiana is you can't capture what you can in other states, like the increases in retail sales taxes, which is the real value of a TIF. TIFs make money. Sales tax. Now, in Missouri, you can actually issue sales taxes. For infrastructure, demolition, we use sales taxes to pay for affordable housing and health care. We use land for vacant land use in buildings. We use tax abatement to help renovate those properties where we freeze the taxes for 10 years or 5 years after the building's been restored. So the house I live in, the taxes were $800 when it was abandoned. They're $3,500 now when it was renovated. If they got tax abatement, I still would have only paid $800. So this is a great way to get these kinds of properties renovated. Retail. We're generating all kinds of new retail downtown because we're giving them loans to locate there. And once you create that nucleus, you actually generate a lot of activity. And then, of course, the economic development guy's got a Wonkin casino, which just opened, which I'm not that big on, but we got a Wonkin casino. So what have we done? In the last 5 years, our population is up by 8,000 people. We've got 9,000 new units, more units downtown, huge increases in everything. It's wonderful what's going on. And compared to, say, other cities, our household income has gone up 13.7%. We've reduced concentrated poverty. We've reduced the amount of families in poverty. These are real measures of your success. It's not how many Calatrava buildings you have. It's these things. We are getting building permits all over the city, not just in the wealthy areas. But we got a lot to work on. Education, I talked about. Health, big issue for us. Sexually transmitted diseases in inner city America is taking its toll. Obesity. As I said to other people, in Chicago, you're 70% more likely to be located near a fast food restaurant than you are a grocery store. It has its implications. Rebuilding aging infrastructure. This is a serious challenge for every city in this country, and it didn't take Minnesota to show what that had happened. I had this slide done before then. This is a serious problem. Now we're going to go to Youngstown. Youngstown, Ohio is Steel City, or was, and that's what happened to it. They blew it all up. And that's what it's like now. Like every place, they did the wonderful pedestrian mall in the downtown area to cure all their problems. Of course, it's a place where nobody goes. Just like every pedestrian mall that's been put on the street is where nobody goes. The best thing you can do for a retail area is slow down cars and allow curbside parking. Okay? Slow the cars down, get the people to come back. So Youngstown looked like that. So they started to think about, well, how can we redo this? We can't rebuild the whole thing. So they acknowledged they were going to shrink. They acknowledged that they were no longer going to provide services to all these places. They were no longer going to cut the grass in the vacant lots. So they started to think about where they could invest in their infrastructure to create pockets of change. Very concentrated pockets of change that then create a life and change the vernacular of the place. And they've been quite successful. They looked at sustainable areas that they're just going to let go fallow, turn them into green spaces. They're making those decisions. And they're saying to people who still want to live in some of these areas, we'll give you the land beside you, you take care of it. Now in St. Louis we were doing that as well, but now people want to build on it, so we're trying to get that land back. But in Youngstown that's not going to happen. They strategically went in and looked at pockets of where they were going to clear out the houses on the last remaining blocks, turn them into pocket parks and let them go into a natural revegetative state. They looked at their employment base, how it was changing. That happens here. Where were the jobs? Where could they have strength? Like a Ball State here, they have a Youngstown State. How do we build on those strengths? They mapped their vacant land. We all use purple for some reason. I'm not sure why. It seems to make it better. They looked at their green areas. When I did that land use plan for St. Louis, I had all those layers. I just kept putting them on top of each other. And you'd be amazed at how fast you learn what you need to do. And now those two graphics for Youngstown quickly showed them what they needed to do in order to shrink, to reduce the costs of running the municipality. And they came up with their new land use plan. They put the green areas where all the old steel factories were. They're turning them into parks that will grow naturally so they don't have to maintain them. They're connecting them with bike trails so people can start to enjoy them. And they're working with the University, Youngstown State, to look at their campus downtown, how they can grow it with incentives from the state to improve the community. And so they've blocked out all this land. They're putting in all the student housing to create all the need for the retail and the associated uses. And they're strategically investing in their first historic buildings to turn them into student housing and expand the Arts Center. Now I want to close with something. And this is a speech that the mayor and I gave in Lyon and Paris last December. And it's critical for everything you're going to do. There's going to be I'm going to start. I don't have this up there. I don't think it's in the next slide. Last year was the first time in the history of the world that the urban population exceeded the rural population in the world. In the next 30 years, the urban population is going to double. So in the next 30 years, the growth in the urban population will be greater than everything that has occurred from this day back in history in urban areas. That is astounding. 80 to 85% of that growth will be in Africa and Asia, and not here. The growth here is going to be due primarily responsible to immigration and to the growth in the Hispanic population. And you need to know that. And you don't need to know that just so you can go out and buy Hispanic magazines and learn Spanish. You need to know this because it's going to influence what you all do. In this country, we expect 120 million people by 2050. That's a 40% growth factor. There'll be 213 billion square feet of floor space to be built. 60% of that has not yet been built. By 2035, 65% of the residential buildings that will exist did not exist 5 years ago. That's massive growth. And if we keep growing the way we're growing, in the same time period, land equal to the size of Colorado will be consumed. Now, what does that tell you about what we're growing? Do you realize that the average household size in this country is getting larger, not smaller? How much space do we need? Megareef. There they are, folks. 80% of that growth is going to occur there. 70% of the region is going to occur in those areas. And Indianapolis is at the bottom of it. That's where it's all going to happen. Now, how many more people can afford to live there? Not a lot. I'm paying $2,200 for a 1,200 square foot condo in Silver Springs, Maryland. I had 3,500 square feet in St. Louis in an 1882 grocery store with 14-foot ceilings where there's a block of limestone in front of my house that the people used to step on to get into a carriage. I paid $305,000 for it. It's on the market for $435,000 if you'd like to buy it, with a 3.5-car garage. Look at the night shot. That tells you something about what's happening. The Midwest is really sucking the balloon, I'm telling you. We've got 35 of the top 50 educational institutions in the country. Where are these graduates going? They ain't coming here. What can we do to get them? Denver's about to dry out of water. St. Louis has got more water than they know what to do with. These are assets that these communities need to build on. What are the 5 most urban places in America that are not located within 100 miles of a large body of water? And you can include the Great Lakes if you want and say Chicago. Okay, what are the 4 next biggest? Most urban places in America not located within 100 miles of salt water. Name them off. Not very easy, is it? But it is. Yell it out. No, that's not urban at all. Twin Cities. No freaking way. They're still riding horses and you can buy a holster at City Hall. Until they stop selling holsters at City Hall, it's not urban. Oh my God, no, you leave the room right now. Is this guy an instructor? Phoenix? Blech. That is a hellhole. Take a glass of water, pour it on the floor, and watch Phoenix grow. Most urban places. Phoenix is not urban. Fly over it. Take a look. Everybody's got a freaking pool. Come on, people. Absolutely. You know what? Nobody in St. Louis ever says that. The street hierarchy in St. Louis is kick-ass. Unbelievable. And they don't realize it. Denver. Potentially Nashville. So, I just isolated this much of the country. And nobody's building there. Why? I can't believe it. I have all these friends from Europe. They just shake their head and say, I don't understand this. It's abysmal. You got to change it. So, the demographic shift in this country is dramatic. The rapid age course, 117% increase in people over the ages of 75. What are we doing to meet that demand? How are we making it easier for them to exist? We're not. And think about that. Think about daily life things that you can do as planners and architects to meet that demand. You're not doing it. You're not being taught it. I know this. Dual parent homes will only be 20% of all households. Do we all remember watching Leave It to Beaver? What's happened to Wally Cleaver? He's not having kids. Wally's found the light and decided he doesn't want them. So that's dramatic. And we're still increasing the household size in this country? There's something wrong. Immigration, I talked about, and the demand for smaller, flexible space. This building just got renovated, actually. So this is what we're doing. We need to do that. And that's why I took the job where I'm working now on the north side of Washington. I have a bumper sticker that says I don't do suburbs. Okay? I'm working in the suburbs now, and that's my job, is to create linear cities. And that's why I went there. And that's the end of the presentation. Questions? Yes? The abandonment in the suburbs. I'm glad that question came up. You know what? I'm going to stand back and laugh. You know, I keep giving a speech with the mayor all across St. Louis saying, in 4 years when the next census stuff comes out, it's not inner city America that's having the problem, it's the first ring suburbs. All those shopping malls that Chris Rock talks about, where the white people used to shop, that's where the problems are going to be. Now, the only thing that's going to solve it was when gas hits $6 a gallon. And people are going to realize that they're going to repopulate those areas. Then you're going to have the problems of intensification, which is what I'm experiencing now, where all the people who are still there don't want any higher density, where they think 1.5 times floor area ratio is big density. And of course, I stand up and say 1.5. I was doing 60. That's the challenge for the inner ring suburbs, is how do we accommodate growth to infill the holes? So all those big roads, those 4-lane roads that go up to the suburbs, they should all have, 6 to 12-story buildings on them. That's going to be the challenge of the suburbs. Next question. Anybody? Yes? Yes? Oh yeah. Frickin' boring as hell with respect to architecture. Well, the problem in St. Louis is the problem in St. Louis is you can't legislate it because in some respects we're just getting to the point where they're not so anxious for things to happen anymore. So I actually started bringing architects down from Toronto and matching them up with developers to get them to think about doing something more modern. And I'm actually working on a project myself where we're going to try and splice that up. The problem with design is you can't legislate it, but you can. You can actually, and I'm going to try it, I'm doing this as we speak in Maryland. I'm showing them legislation from Ontario to take to the Maryland legislature to try and seek design control, to actually force them to do things the right way. And what you have to do is you have to find a big mistake and use that as your example. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to try and do it through the plan of subdivision process, to bring in design control that way, which they have now through legislation that requires you to get a town architect and have things go through a design committee. What you'll find a lot of cities do is they create design review. And if you have development review processes, you create a design review committee of citizens and you funnel all the big projects through it, you can potentially get better projects if you have good people on those committees. I personally don't like those committees, but there have been some good examples of them. I personally don't like them. Ultimately, it's a matter of taste. One man's treasure is another man's garbage. But there's the basics. And in Toronto, we did a good job on the basics, controlling the mass of the building, the size of the floor plates, and their orientations on the lots, and then basically using moral suasion and embarrassment to make them do better. So for example, in San Diego, they have the architectural awards, and they give out awards for bad architecture. And the architects actually show up. It's a bit of a fun thing to say you had the worst building this year. It's a great way to level the embarrassment. Peer pressure is the best way to do it. So what I'm doing now in Washington and Maryland, every time I publicly speak, I say the architecture in this community is crap. Absolute crap. And so I'm trying to show them better examples, and I'm going to start bringing people in from other cities to show them what's good. Sure, all the time. Who, the Europeans? Yeah, sure they do. But remember this. A lot of people in this country, something about Americans. Americans love to think they were first. New urbanism. Transit-oriented development. What a load of schmuck. Go to the city of Edmonton, Alberta. I'll show you what new urbanism is. Go to that picture I showed you. It's not new. And when the problem is when you start to tell people that I'd like to bring a European in, they go, oh my God, they didn't join us in Iraq or something. It's really a pain in the ass. And they don't like to hear it. However, if you do design competitions and you bring an element of that in, it's a good way to spice it up. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be bringing people in from Europe to talk about individual things. And by the way, if you are interested in urban design and you want to learn about public spaces, you want to research everything that Jan Gehl has written. And if it's not in your library, you better get it. G-E-H-L. He and I spent 3 days in St. Louis because he got snowed in. Fabulous. I'm going to have him come in and talk about public space. What he did in Melbourne, you want to see a revitalized city other than St. Louis, go to Melbourne. It's fabulous. And bring in the right examples to help do it. But that, and then make sure everybody comes to these seminars and they start to have their eyes open. The key is to get a benefactor who will invest in that kind of thing. Really is key. I was trying to do a Hortense steel building in St. Louis as a boutique hotel. I don't know if it's going to, you know what Hortense steel is? You know what Russ? Oh God, this design is fabulous. I got a guy in Toronto to do it. Whether it'll work or not, I don't know, but I found a guy who's willing to try. And you have to strategically do these things. But architecture ultimately is, you got to do what you got to do. But embarrassment's a great factor. Any other questions? Yes? Two ways. Money and visualization. I was working on a project of prefabricated panels. That project, the 3D Automax, that was all prefabricated. We talked about how fast it could go up, how flexible the space was, and how we could lower the cost so that ordinary people could afford it. That's what sold that project. The animation and that speech. That's how I did it. Very, very easy. Ultimately, there are still the people who want the brick facade with the vinyl siding down the side, but ultimately you got to try and change those things. It's very, very difficult. But the moment you get a few projects in, then it works for you. But that's a tough sell everywhere, by the way. Next question. Anybody? Yes? Paris Hilton? Oh, sorry. Smart growth. I mean, it goes back to his question about Europe, If gas is expensive, you have smart growth. You got small cars, you got smart growth. I was walking to the Eiffel Tower in Paris in December, and I'm walking by and I stop, and I didn't have my freaking camera with it, and I look over, and here's a smart car parked. Not this way, this way. It was hysterical. They've been selling those in Canada for 7 years. They're just coming to this country. Smart growth. Smart growth is what cities used to do. That's all it is. St. Louis was covered with streetcars. And I told the story earlier. You know why you don't have streetcars in America, right? General Motors, Firestone tires, bought them all, tore them all up, and then turned around and sold Firestone tires on GM buses to the cities. They were all smart growth. We just don't do it anymore. Railways. You ever ride the TGV? Remember the first Mission Impossible movie? TGV train? Yeah, that's the one. Try it sometime. You won't take a plane again. It's so convenient. But we just have been investing wrong. We built highways. The largest subsidy in the history of the world is the interstate highway system. Highways. We got to stop doing it. And I understand they want to extend 69. No. Put in a train. It'll be cheaper. Next question. Oh, the other thing by cost about marketing modern design, you asked that question. Green design in modern design is much easier, and they've been doing that in Europe for decades with chimney effects. The heating costs for buildings go down dramatically. Very, very good for selling modern design. Very good. And leave copies of Dwell magazine everywhere you go. It's only $19 a subscription. Anybody else? Yes. Progressive city? Progressive cities are easy. They're cities that think progressive. Progressive meaning diverse. Diversity is key to being progressive, because if you have a diverse environment, everything else falls into place. I didn't say this. Right now in Toronto, there's 165 multi-story buildings over 20 stories being built or approved. Of those, 65 of them are over 30 stories high. This goes on every day. Why? Because so much immigration comes to that city. 45% of the 15 35-story, 40-story buildings around the baseball stadium with the retractable roof are owned by people from Hong Kong or Asia for their kids to go to school. Diversity drives transit-oriented development. Diversity drives smart growth. I'm going to wash myself at home with soap when I get back to the hotel. It drives all those things. They're used to living in small spaces, in urban environments, and they are much greener than we always have been. That's being progressive. If you get immigration, you're progressive. It's probably not what you were looking for. Oh, and another one, connectivity. If you want a fascinating thesis topic, connectivity. And that's what I'm trying to get Johns Hopkins and everybody to think about in Maryland, because we're about to build 12 million square feet. The future is about diversity and connectivity. And I'm not just talking about this. I'm talking about everything you do where you build. Connections to the seniors population, connections to the children. So Johns Hopkins now builds an institution that's urban, where the scientists come down the elevator and go to a Starbucks. They walk down the street to go to the laboratory. Their kids go to the school in one of the laboratories. They're combined with the public education system to offer a higher level of education as a public benefit. The gymnasium for the school is in fact where the researchers are exercising. The seniors who have graduated and retired, like the people that may be retired here one day, are living on campus and mentoring. This is connectivity. This is the beginning of connectivity. This is what we do not do well in North America. That's what you should be writing your thesis topic on. Those are the communities we should be building. Forget transit-oriented development. Forget smart growth. Forget new urbanism. It's E equals MC squared. And today I'm calling it a connected city. So if anybody uses it, it's mine. I must be cited. That's what progressive is. I just changed my definition. Anybody else? Did you raise your hand? Oh, ask a question anyway. How can you make people more aware of it? A great way to do that, the federal government is sinking a lot of money into indicators now. I just had a session with the Federal Reserve Bank, and they're sinking all this money into cultural arts indicators. How culturally diverse is your city? Well, you know what they did? They're using New York City as the base. Give me a break. That's like trying to judge a luxury car between, a Kia and using a Cadillac as the base. It just doesn't work. So the feds are trying to sink a lot of money into these indicator things to try and determine the ways of their programs. Start connecting the dots. Look at cities that are diverse in what they have. Based on the diversity, don't go to San Francisco, go to some smaller places that are doing it, where maybe there's been a large influx of Hispanic community, or a city like St. Louis, which was built by immigrants, but now is not diverse with the exception of this massive influx of Bosnians. Isolate the area where they've moved to and see what it's done to the community. Do that in 3 communities and it'll tell you what immigration can do, and use that to sell the message. Because I couldn't believe this the other day, that they passed a law in the Virginia state legislature that anybody who hires an illegal immigrant can be prosecuted and go to jail. And it got one line in the newspaper. I'm going, did I miss something? I mean, how brain dead is this? So now's a good time actually to do that. Do it before the next election and go to one of the debates and ask the question. Because it's very, very true. Because there's a lot of communities that don't survive without immigration. And remember what happened in the turn of the 19th century in Canada and the United States. When you came to this country, you were often told where you went. And as a result, cities like Edmonton, Saskatoon, up where I'm from, developed. It was very beneficial immigration. I'm not saying today you tell them where they have to go, but you might do that with graduate doctors. They do in Ontario. So try that. That's a really good way to do it. Are you an architect? Okay. That means you don't know yet? Okay. Good luck. Well, thank you very much. If you want to talk individually, please come up afterwards.